My name is Leslie Poster, and it is my honor as the Society's Awards Chair to bring us all together to celebrate a year of spectacular achievements in hosting a ceremony that continues to be a bright spot in our conference and dare I say, also in our professional lives. I am so grateful to the many committee members who helped me to vet the outstanding nominees in all of our categories. Please stand if you were among some of my favorite people who helped as judges this year. And I really do mean that these are my favorite people. I think it's fair to say that most people, if you asked them to read 14 hefty tomes, they would block your number. But I am glad to be in community with people who welcome that task with excitement. My gratitude extends also to our hosts here at the Library of Congress. I am delighted to share that the library will be kicking off our afternoon of honors with a special announcement of some tremendous news. And with that, I will welcome to the stage Acting Principal Deputy Librarian Robin Dale.
Good afternoon. As Leslie said, I'm currently the acting principal deputy librarian. But in my day job, I'm also the deputy librarian for Library Collections and Services, something that's probably known to many of you in terms of serving in a couple positions at the same time as a sort of federal government specialty, right? But please, I really want to welcome you to the Library of Congress. And of course, as the nation's first federal cultural institution, we're really delighted to have you here and think about the really great work that you do. The library has hosted the Society for History in the federal government's annual conference for 3 straight years. We're really excited about that and hope to see you back again soon. Would really like to thank the Society for being the voice of the federal history community and being a resource to the Library of Congress as well. We're really excited to hear more about this year's recipients of the Roosevelt Award, the Trask Awards, and other SHFG prize winners, but also share some exciting news, as Leslie mentioned. So 2 years ago, John Cole won the Trask Award, giving his lecture on the theme of Guardians of History at the Library of Congress, focusing on the men and women who have served as unofficial historians of the agency. Now, John was the agency's first official historian, and he served from 2016 through 2021. He long envisioned a dedicated Library of Congress history office. And today, I'm proud to announce that John is making that vision possible. John is supporting a 5-year initiative that seeks to inform and inspire the American people by sharing the library's history, connecting our collective future to the lessons of our past. This generous gift will allow us to appoint a historian to lead this important effort, as well as an archivist who will work with that historian and other library staff to process and preserve our own LOC archives, which I should say are one of the most used collections that we have here at the library. So thank you so much, John, for your generous gift, and I would love if you would please stand and be acknowledged for that. So thank you so much for that, and now I'm going to have Leslie return to the podium.
What incredible news, and we're so glad that you're here to share it with us and to receive our applause one more time. This year's ceremony is also special because we're awarding our Franklin Delano Roosevelt Award, the Society's most prestigious honor. I have the privilege of introducing Michelle Lyons, who recently retired from the National Institutes of Health and History and Stetton Museum after 30 years of service. But this career is impressive not just for its length. In her time, Michelle built from the ground up the collections that document the accomplishments of NIH and its position in the world. She created abundant products that shared that history with the public, 20-plus exhibitions, thousands of social media posts, and countless talks and articles about her agency. Whether translating complex science for a broad audience, collaborating with a Nobel Prize winner, or carting archival documents and artifacts to and fro, she dedicated herself to meeting any need. Yet still, amidst so many accomplishments, her nominators held most highly her personal commitment to her work. They wrote, "Michelle's personal approach defined her work. In times of hardship, she was often the one holding things together, going far beyond her duties to be a champion and advocate for our office. For all of her professional achievements, Michelle will be missed most for her endless enthusiasm and support. As the office has grown over the past few years, Michelle served as a mentor and advisor to all. She offered a kind ear when needed and pushed us to dream beyond our perceived limits. We will deeply miss her presence." We've talked a lot about Michelle's past, but as she is a newly announced member of the Board of Directors of the Public Education Project, we know that there is plenty more in the future to come. And with that, I am delighted to welcome to the stage Michelle Lyons.
Well, first of all, thank you to my colleagues for nominating me for this award, and the SHFG for bestowing it upon me. I was really shocked and overwhelmed that the thought of such extremely busy people under such tremendous stress as federal employees should take their time to do this. And I cannot begin to tell you what it means to me. My federal service began when I was born into a military family. Since then, I've been a federal summer hire, a graduate intern, contractor, employee, and reemployed annuitant. I was RIF'd twice, once when Glasnost sunk the massive U.S. Information Agency Exhibits Department, and once when President Bill Clinton initiated layoffs to balance the budget. During my decades at the National Institutes of Health's Office of NIH History and Stetson Museum, the office changed, as such things do, from high points of staffing to lows when I was the only dedicated employee. So, what have I learned from all that about public service and history? A graduate student once replied to some information that I'd sent them. "Thank you. My professor told me that no one in the federal government would ever answer me." So after I congratulated myself, I realized how very cynical that statement was. And it's happened early in my career at NIH, and it challenged me to always be the human among the bureaucrats. And for the most part, as a museum person, that was pretty easy, because much of my time was spent alone with museum objects, researching them, accessioning them, cataloging them, transporting them, and safely storing them. And maybe you start to talk to the objects because there isn't anybody else around, and they tell interesting stories. And so maybe I was alone a little too much. But I had time to think about what makes our jobs as federal history professionals unusual in the history world. First, the federal history professionals, which includes curators, collections managers, archivists, and historians, actively document the present. Their agencies are living organisms whose stories they desperately attempt to preserve. And sometimes, history is perpetrated on the federal history professional herself. Second, the federal history professional has many overlords. There's the other people in your office, if you're lucky to have other people in your office, and your agency. There's the Constitution of the United States, which federal employees swear to uphold. There's the media and historians and documentarians, some working now, and some hypothetical beings of the future. But most of all, there's the American public. So what qualities does a history professional in the federal government possess? So here's 4 that sustained me during years of fat and famine: creativity, storytelling, cataloging, and backbone. Creativity is using imagination and ingenuity to build useful, representative, and deep collections. How do you find out about what's out there? You know what's happening in your agency, so you can focus on future collecting. You have an ear to the ground about who's retiring or leaving. You advertise your agency presence in your agency, and you make contacts within the agency with the laboratory or office managers or record keepers, the surplus staff, the maintenance and facilities managers, and even the lawyers. And by far, my favorite collecting adventures have been with the facilities people, climbing into attics, investigating dank basements, and gazing out windows of buildings soon to be torn down in dusty communion with the original occupants. You call people up and say, "You're interesting, can we come visit?" You're extra nosy, so that if you're asked to come consult on historical materials in someone's office or department, you check their trash cans, evidencing such enthusiasm for what they threw away that they're afraid to ever dispose of anything again without asking you first. And they tell all their friends about you. An annoying artist, the federal history professional proactively creates a worthwhile collection. And of course, creativity is related to another quality of federal history professionals: storytelling. The most visible aspect of storytelling are the exhibits, articles, books, and social media offerings that federal history offices produce. And I truly enjoyed my years on the SHFG Articles Awards committees, because we love to share the thrill of the stories we've discovered, whether it's with the public, other history professionals, or people who make the mistake of asking us what we do for a living. And storytelling is also a useful skill to exercise within your own agency, because the stories that you can tell about your agency are what make you valuable. Federal history professionals know why things are the way they are, who the important players have been and are, and how the agency has survived challenges before. We should be seen as advisors at best and consultants at least for agency senior staff, and effective storytelling can capture their attention. Which brings us to cataloging. And I'm using cataloging in a general way for the documentation of a collection. Cataloging is the heart of what we do. The elements of all the histories live in our catalogs. All the information that makes something important, relevant, or just plain interesting are secreted into the catalog. And other people can find it, even 40 years later. Catalogs are the justifications for our collections. The last quality of the federal history professional is backbone. Certainly, a physical backbone is important to lug boxes or heavy objects, but there are other kinds of backbones required by the federal history professional. There's the putting up with other people backbone, which is especially useful in collaborative efforts with people who don't understand history or who have a lot of drama in their offices. It can also be useful when dealing with difficult but important donors. There's the moral backbone, which is used to ensure that agency failures are documented as well as its achievements, and that interpretation remains historically accurate. The accepting change backbone includes embracing technological advances as well as pivoting because of resource challenges. Don't dwell on the could have been, should have been, would have been. Such thoughts won't get you to the future, but will leave you mired in regret and despair. Acknowledge the stupidity of the forces above you and get on with it. And I think we all have plenty examples of that. Federal history professionals often have a backbone that other history professionals lack: the grief counselor backbone. This backbone supports you through yet another encounter with a coworker or family member who is struggling with the loss of a colleague, mentor, friend, or relative. You listen, ask questions about the beloved, give space for tears and anger, and offer solace, a secured legacy, and sometimes hugs. This is not public service, it's human service on the most basic level. And lastly, there's the never losing your sense of mission backbone, which sometimes is the only backbone holding you up. My mission was to collect, document, preserve, and interpret NIH history so that the American public would understand what a gift it had given to itself and to the world by funding this agency. Sometimes when the fate of our office, often teetering on dissolution, sent me into despair, I'd envision a map of the United States and picture little lights representing the thousands of members of the general public I had interacted with. The intellectual copyright lawyers with their lawsuits, the labs and businesses that needed instrument manuals, the granddaughter learning that her grandmother had broken color and education barriers, the auto mechanic who looked like Elvis Presley, who'd had his heart repaired as a child at NIH and grew up to have children and grandchildren of his own and had saved every single document, object, and photo of his years as an NIH patient. The distraught man who thought that a clinical study that he'd been in as a child had affected his current health. And the anxious women concerned for their daughters who wanted to get pregnant in 2020. And the lights blink on in places other than the US, in Canada, Europe, India, Egypt, and Brazil, for example. The history professional is often the last resort for people who want to talk to a human in a federal agency. I think the reasoning is that history people should know everything. And this is the federal history professional's overarching mission backbone. Answer the questions, listen to the problems. You may be the only human and humane representative of the US government this person will ever deal with. Make a lasting impression. Thank you.
I'll be presenting the first of our annual awards, and then I'll be welcoming to the stage some of our committee members who will continue on in that ceremony, which concludes with our Trask lecture. The Excellence in New Media Award recipient was the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics topic page by NASA's History Office. The NASA History Office's National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics topic page, created in anticipation of the 110th anniversary of NACA's founding, features comprehensive NACA-related resources that include encyclopedic overviews, biographies, oral histories of key figures, archival image galleries, historical publications, and a new video series titled Launching the Future of Flight. NASA's integration of different forms of high production value media, as well as the staggering number of research hours represented by the website, are impressive. The Future of Flight video was particularly innovative in the way that it brought an extensive collection of still photographs to life with professional animation techniques. This piece of new media was highly regarded by our committee, and unfortunately, the fine professionals who created it were unable to join us today, and that just means that we'll have to clap louder to see if they can hear us. So congratulations to NASA's History Office. Next, we'll be giving our book award, which will be presented by Shannon Granville.
Thank you very much. As a member of the Book Award Committee, the Society for History and the Federal Government 2026 Book Prize is awarded to Total Defense, the New Deal and the Invention of National Security by Andrew Preston. Preston's work presents a strong, engaging argument for understanding the United States' modern concept of national security as a creation of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's distinct internationalist mindset. By shifting the nation's threat perception from a narrow focus on defending its own borders to a wider recognition of potential enemies abroad, Roosevelt and the New Deal policymakers reshaped how the U.S. federal government has engaged with the world from the mid-20th century to the present day. Total Defense examines the connections between this remarkable policy transformation and the New Deal's domestic security agenda, illustrating how both aspects continue to enable and constrain the nation's approach to problems and challenges at home and around the world.
We'll next be presenting our prize for article or essay with Julie Prieto.
All right, thanks, Leslie. Each year, the Article Award Committee chooses a short publication that exhibits excellence in federal history. This year, we are proud to award our prize to Dr. Colin Williams for his article, The Defense Logistics Agency in Operation Enduring Freedom, The Commodity Side of Logistics Efficiency. Published in the Journal of Federal History's 2025 issue, this innovative article provides a window onto an important and still vastly understudied area of U.S. history, contributing greatly to our understanding of Operation Enduring Freedom. It gives a valuable overview of the role logistics played in the conflict and DLA's contribution to supplying posts, establishing transportation routes, managing complex contracts, and then disassembling all of this infrastructure within a very short time frame. The article also reveals some of the ways in which large-scale military operations changed over the course of the war. In addition, the work makes good use of declassified documents and other government sources to form its argument, providing future scholars with an invaluable base upon which to engage in future research. Join me in congratulating Dr. Colin Williams on his achievement.
Our next award is for historic preservation and exhibitions, and it will be presented by Alexander Poster.
Hello. Thank you all. I do have to apologize. The better half of the Poster household just left the stage. I'm up here to present the annual Historic Preservation and Exhibitions Prize to recognize excellence in interpretation, display, and preservation of federal history. The award winner's project serves as a model for the exhibition of federal history and furthering the use of history within the federal government. This year's winner is Call to Arms, The Soldier and the Revolutionary War by the National Museum of the United States Army. The Army celebrated its 250th anniversary in 2025 and the National Museum of the United States Army commemorated its semi-quincentennial with the exhibit A Call to Arms. As the name suggests, the exhibit showcases weapons, powder horns, and artillery from America's nascent military, and even ascribes different weapons to individual soldiers, providing an immersive experience to visitors who learn not just of campaigns and battles, but of life at camp and the front lines too. The exhibit displays numerous interactive maps of battles, as well as three-dimensional models of where the Army fought, giving visitors a broader understanding of the Revolution from small skirmishes to the entire war. With the assistance of New Jersey-based artist B.J. Ervick, the team of curators who put together A Call to Arms have showed us how our Merchant Army lived and fought, and why, after 250 years, they still should be celebrated. And a bunch of folks worked on this. There was museum curator Matthew Godek, digital media specialist Scott Metzler, exhibit support specialist Adam Zielinski, and museum director and chief curator Paul Miranda, who's here today. Thank you.
We'll close our ceremony with our annual Trask Lecture, named for the late Society for History and the Federal Government president and longtime federal history pioneer and mentor, Roger R. Trask. The award is presented to persons whose careers and achievements reflect a commitment to and an understanding of the unique importance of federal history work and the Society for History and the Federal Government's mission. This year's recipient is Claire Jerry, who recently retired from the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. Through exhibitions, scholarship, and public outreach, Claire Jerry has given the public countless new ways to explore the history of the federal government. As a curator at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, Jerry stewarded the museum's signature exhibition on the history of the United States' highest office, an exhibit titled The American Presidency, A Glorious Burden. Within the museum's political history division, Jerry led projects to catalog and increase access to the museum's vast collection of political campaign materials. She also worked tirelessly to expand the collection into the 21st century, traveling to document the evolution of the nation's politics at political rallies and party conventions across the country. Working alongside the museum's education and communications departments, Jerry made the history of American politics a cornerstone of the museum's public outreach. Prior to coming to the Smithsonian, Jerry held several museum and academic appointments, including chief curator at McKissick Museum, curator at the Paul Findlay Congressional Office Museum, guest curator at the Harry S. Truman Library and Museum, and chair of the Department of History at McMurray College. In addition to her many contributions, formal and informal, voluntary and involuntary, as an advocate for public history and for public historians. She retired from the Smithsonian in 2026, and this year's Trask Award honors her many years of dedicated service as a public historian. Please welcome to the stage, Claire Jerry.
Thank you, Leslie, for that kind introduction. And may I start by saying that Michelle Lyons is a little bit of a hard act to follow. And I want to assure you that we did not compare notes, but you will actually hear some recurring themes, which is one of the things I'm going to be talking about, is how many recurring themes there are in Trask lectures. It isn't often that I find myself overwhelmed by the opportunity to speak before a public audience or an audience of my peers. However, today I do feel more than a little overwhelmed because as I have come to know many of you and the Society for History and the Federal Government, I don't see you as my peers. I see you as an assembly of professionals I might someday hope to call my peers. That you have welcomed me into what this society calls the federal history community, and that today you are presenting me with the Roger R. Trask Award is unbelievably humbling. I am honored that you have embraced me as your professional peer, and this is without a doubt the most significant recognition of my museum career. Now, if not the first, I am certainly one of the few Trask lecturers who did not have the privilege of knowing Roger Trask personally, and I am very sorry for that. It turns out he and I had some interesting things in common. We both attended and later taught at independent liberal arts colleges that had their roots in religious traditions, committed to critical thinking, ethical leadership, and lifelong learning. His eulogy, published by the AAH, describes Roger as having, quote, a relentless enthusiasm for politics. I think it's safe to say that he and I have that in common as well. But more importantly, beyond what Roger Trask and I share that might have led each of us to federal history, I have come to understand how he shaped my professional life, even though we never met. I have learned through all of you and this society that so many things I have taken for granted in my career, access, transparency, accountability, engagement, to name just a few, were made possible by the vision Roger and others had for what a federal history community could look like, and how we and the nation could be strengthened by our learning from and working with each other. I appreciate this opportunity to explore with you for a few minutes how my federal history path, in some ways perhaps an unconventional one, hopefully reflects the legacy of Roger Trask and of each of you. Now, while preparing for today, I read and watched many of the previous Trask lectures. And if you haven't done that for a while, I encourage you to do so. It is very enlightening. Not only did I learn a great deal about this organization and its members, I learned a great deal about myself. Now, as you just heard, I have recently retired from the National Museum of American History, where I worked as a curator for just under a decade. That was one of the reasons I was initially surprised to be recognized by this organization. I hadn't thought I had been in the federal government long enough. But the more I spoke with colleagues and listened to the lectures and reflected on my career, I realized I was not thinking about all the words in our society's name, nor all the ways I have engaged with federal history throughout almost my entire life. So with apologies to both the name of our society and to Abraham Lincoln, and reflecting my deep obsession that Leslie knows with prepositions, what I came to understand led me to title this talk today, History of the Government, for the Government, in the Government, the Many Paths to Federal History. Now, many Trask lecturers and many of us in this room today can remember when as children we became excited about history. It may have been a grandparent's story about their own childhood, a biography we read, a television show we watched, or a trip to a national park that sparked our historical imagination and made the past come alive for each of us. This is where my path began, and I have very clear memories of all of those things. Although as a child, I certainly didn't yet think of myself as a historian. I took the required U.S. history class in high school, but not in college, although most of my closest friends did and raved about Butler University's history professors. What I did take, as a speech major, was a course called The History of American Public Address. The first upper division paper I remember writing as an undergraduate was on Daniel Webster's 7th of March speech. Now, I didn't travel from Indianapolis to the Library of Congress or to a NARA facility to explore Webster's papers, but I did read a lot of issues of the Congressional Globe and newspapers that were housed in my local library. I didn't realize it then, but that was one of my first steps toward becoming a historian of the federal government. Now, fast forward about 10 years to a class in my doctoral program. It actually surprised me to realize that it was only 10 years that had happened. I was still a communication major, taking classes in the history of American public address, now including presidential oratory. I wrote a paper in a class on the rhetoric of Frances I eventually presented this work at a professional conference, and it was later published in an anthology on women public speakers in the United States. This was another step on my path to writing history of the federal government. Someday, and I guess I have more time on my hands now, I would like to return to a study of the rhetoric of the cabinet. But the bulk of my doctoral work was on the rhetoric of women's suffrage, and that's where my research went for several years. I focused particularly on leaders who advocated for a national amendment, as opposed to those who were working on a state-by-state basis. And again, I wasn't using the vocabulary, but I was studying federal history. After completing my graduate work in communication, I spent more than 20 years in the academy, teaching and continuing my research on suffrage and women in politics. The majority of my career was spent in that liberal arts college I mentioned before. Now, because of the integrated nature of the curriculum at McMurray College, even though I did not have a degree in history, I became the chair of the history department. I can explain how that happened to you later. I was teaching classes in my areas of expertise, those areas where communication and history overlap and intersect. Women's history, the history of political campaigning, and presidential history. I was increasingly a historian of the federal government, and I was getting closer to becoming a public historian. My last big research project while I was at McMurray was on the rhetoric of presidential libraries and museums. So now I was both using and studying federal institutions and archives. At the same time, my colleagues and I were developing a track in public history for our students to help them see that there were careers in history in addition to teaching. Didn't take me long to realize that I was enjoying putting those students in internships more than most of them were enjoying doing the internships. That caused me to start thinking some new things about my own career. But it wasn't until something happened to me that appeared at the time to have nothing to do with history that I would become a historian for the government. Now, remember that I said I learned a lot from watching and reading those Trask lectures. The breadth, depth, and quality of the work I encountered there both astounded and inspired me. But something else surprisingly also stood out. As a group, we are metaphorical people. Over the years, Trask lecturers have described their careers with comparisons including, but not limited to, music, food, westerns, geography, knitting, boundary stones, and even ephemera flies. Now, I grew up in Indiana, so bear with me. I'm going to start talking about basketball. So humor me for a minute, and you can blame Leslie for this. She encouraged me to tell this story. Now, I could talk about basketball and compare it to history education, saying that it teaches individual skills and teamwork. I could talk about how players on the court don't get there with a lot of hard work behind the scenes, and also the important help of coaches, trainers, teammates, sort of like historians, who research and write with the help of archivists, collections managers, other scholars, and their colleagues long before their manuscript is printed or their exhibits are opened. Now, all of that is true, but I confess my story is not purely metaphorical. It's actually about basketball. By the way, I never played except the occasional game of horse with my brother, and I still can't shoot a free throw. But basketball changed my life, and basketball made me a public historian. Now, if you don't know Indiana, you may not know that basketball is in our DNA. I'm in Indiana. I love the game. And one of my earliest memories, even before my first memory of going to a national park, was of watching my father, who was then a high school principal, honor our small town team that had made the Elite Eight in the state tournament. By the way, the movie Hoosiers is actually a documentary. Just telling you. Now, I never really wanted to play basketball, but maybe because I was a speech major, I always wanted to be a public address announcer. You know, the person that yells, "Leslie, poster for 3," that person. I wanted to be that person. I would sit at the top of McMurray's gym and quietly practice announcing. Now, we didn't have an announcer. MAC was a small D3 program. So after I had served as a volunteer, occasionally running the clock or keeping the scorer's book at the table, I found the courage to ask our athletic director if I could at least introduce the lineup. He said yes, and over the next 7 years, I actually became a public address announcer. I joined the National Association of Public Address Announcers. At the time, I was one of only 6 women in the organization. I took all their trainings and over time gradually improved and added to what I could call during a game. It's one of my proudest moments when the SID from a competing school turned to me and said, "You're the best announcer in the conference." And I can see that some of you are going, "Where's she going? I mean, where are we going to get there?" So here comes the punchline to this. What that experience taught me was that with enough interest and enough effort, I could learn to do something I had never done before. I could get better at it. I could get good at it. So remember, at the same time that I'm announcing basketball games, I was also enjoying supervising those public history interns. My experience and success courtside gave me the courage to leave my tenured, full tenure track position to go back to school to get my first history degree, this one in public history, so that I could start doing something I had never done before. My own first internship was at the Harry S. Truman Library and Museum, a federal institution. So now I was finally doing history for the government. Now, that internship was only the beginning of my second career, one that would focus more than I could have ever imagined on history for as well as history of the government. I will never be able to fully express the gratitude I feel to Clay Bowski, who was then the Truman Supervisory Curator, for taking a chance on a second career intern, and then for inviting me back as a guest curator to lead an exhibition team for a temporary exhibit there. That opportunity opened every future opportunity I would have in the field of federal history. In addition to working with the staff and collections at the Truman Library, obviously part of the National Archives, my exhibit team included representatives from the Harry S. Truman National Historic Site, part of the National Park Service. I wasn't yet in the government, but my work was for the government, and I was working alongside other federal historians. Here I will introduce a basketball metaphor. My exhibit there, Tracing the Trumans, was an unbelievable experience. And on the night that we opened, my husband turned to me and said, "You realize you've already had your Final Four experience." And I was still a volunteer. Now, so this volunteer experience led to my first paid museum job, curator at the Paul Finley Congressional Office Museum, which is part of Illinois College, a private liberal arts institution in central Illinois. Not only did I work for the college, I in essence worked for Representative Finley, then a spry 92-year-old who still had stories to tell and artifacts to donate. And he too made a huge impact on the rest of my career. As the Finley curator, I managed and interpreted objects from Finley's 22-year career in Congress and his congressional papers, as well as managing the Illinois College Congressional Hall of Fame. This little tiny college, never more than 1,000 students in the middle of nowhere, Illinois, has sent more than 20 of their alumni to Capitol Hill, including William Jennings Bryan, who, as my colleagues will attest, continues to be fairly important in my federal history career. So federal history was becoming more and more part of my professional identity. After the Finley, I became the chief curator of collections and research at McKissick Museum, which is the university museum for the University of South Carolina. I was finally a full-time public historian, although in this case I was employed by a state institution. Now, the mission statement of McKissick focuses on state and regional history, but it has a sizable national campaign collection, as well as a great deal of material related to Jimmy Burns, who is one of the most interesting and controversial federal politicians of the 20th century. And I would love to bend your ear about Jimmy Burns later. My exhibit on Burns was a very satisfying experience, but it wasn't the most interesting federal history project I participated in while working at McKissick. I was privileged to accompany Allison Marsh, at that time the director of the university's public history program, and several public history graduate students on Allison's field trip to Naval Station Guantanamo Bay. I never expected to utter the sentence, "I spent spring break at Gitmo." Now, while there, we conducted 3 different public history projects related to the naval base. We were definitely doing history for the federal government. Some of our students conducted oral histories that became part of the Guantanamo Public Memory Project. I was part of the other 2 teams, one that did some intro-level consulting with the base museum, and the other that helped the base library get intellectual control over the only complete set of the base newspaper in existence, including helping to hand carry it as luggage back to the mainland for digitization. I watched with great professional delight as our students learned in real time that public history matters to people. It matters to history. It matters to our nation. And I was delighted to have had the opportunity to be part of that work. Now, eventually, my federal history path brought me to being a curator of political history at the Smithsonian. Now I was also in the federal government, while collecting for the government and telling stories of the government. Now, as with all federal curators, this job has multiple parts: collecting, exhibiting, researching, and service. The two largest aspects of my role were being in the field collecting, as Leslie mentioned, collecting for every campaign cycle of presidents, and then taking over project director responsibilities for the American Presidency exhibit she mentioned, an exhibit which opened in 2000 under the curatorial leadership of Harry Rubenstein, Spencer Crew, and Lonnie Bunch. I'll give you a moment to think about what it means to propose a revision to an exhibit curated by the now sitting secretary of the Smithsonian. Now, tense as that sometimes was, it was not the toughest task I faced in those roles. The responsibility of documenting contemporary campaigns and the presidency in real time provided both excitement and challenge. At times, it seemed like everything was, to borrow a word we have all heard too often in the past few years, and I've heard at least 3 times today, unprecedented. And especially our efforts to collect during primaries, nominating conventions, protests, and hearings, and then the decisions we face about how to exhibit current history both on the floor and on digital platforms. Not to mention, we were doing a lot of this also during a global pandemic. All of that is challenging, to say the least. Now, I don't want to burden you with a lot of stories, but Leslie said I could tell a few. And so I would like to share a few of my personal highlights and maybe some lowlights, such as standing on the sidelines, watching voters move themselves around like chess pieces on a middle school gymnasium floor during the Iowa caucuses, and then coming back with some of their signs and buttons and a coloring sheet provided by children while they watched their Iowa parents vote. I remember the moment in New Hampshire when my colleague and I realized we were probably the only 2 people in the country who saw Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump at campaign rallies in person on the same day. In one memorable and intense 4-month period in the summer of 2024, I attended and collected from 3 national nominating conventions. You're going 3, the Republicans, the Democrats, and the Libertarians. Some of you have heard some of those stories. COVID had taken that opportunity away from me in 2020, so I found the 2024 cycle particularly exciting, thought-provoking, entertaining, and yes, exhausting. But I managed to hold on to my relentless enthusiasm for politics, and I hope that Roger Trask would have been proud. Now, many of you have heard the delight, or have experienced the delight, of discovering a previously unexamined document in an archive, and I've heard some really lovely papers about that today. Because our political history division doesn't just collect the most recent elections. We have objects that go back all the way to George Washington. I have also had the experience with objects that came to us unexpectedly. The donor who sent the museum absolutely pristine campaign ribbons from the 1890s that not only told stories of individual campaigns, but also provided material culture clues about how ribbons were manufactured for multiple markets in the 19th century. Or the now elderly activist who had saved the most remarkable ephemera from his years as a young man protesting the Vietnam War, including mimeographed instructions on how to prepare for a march, what to wear, and how many sandwiches to bring. I mean, I've had interns who they go, mimeograph? They don't even know what that is. He sent his armband about Kent State and many other objects. He later told me how grateful he and his partner had been that they had donated those objects before their home was threatened by the Palisade Fire. Now, I wasn't looking for those ribbons or Vietnam protest material, but it's fair to say that my colleagues and I know that objects like those exist, and that some will someday find a home in the National Collection. More remarkable is when we are surprised by an object we knew nothing about and could not have anticipated the opportunity to collect. My favorite example of such an unexpected object that I helped bring into the National Collection is a banner that was used in a protest in Berlin the day after Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, my specialty is political rhetoric. So imagine how I felt to be offered a banner that quotes JFK's famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech from 1963, and then adapts it into a German phrase that translates, "We are all Ukrainians." The first person I showed that banner to after it came into the collection worked for the Ukrainian parliament. She cried. Those are good collecting moments. Now, other than the inevitable backlog of paperwork, cataloging, photography, helping to build and steward the National Collection of History, both for and of the government, has been an extremely rewarding part of my job. But I should also talk about exhibition work, particularly as it intersects with our collection. Now, political history just keeps happening. So the curatorial work in our division is a clear example of what many of you have experienced when, for example, compiling and editing documentary histories or building the archives for your agencies. How do we know now what will be important then? What should we accept? What should we decline? What mistakes are we going to make? Either keeping something that turns out not to have been very important, or missing the object that became an icon of a person or an event. And what do we exhibit? And when do we put it on the floor? Two short examples. I have the dubious distinction of being the only curator at the National Museum to have had an exhibit completely canceled because of COVID. My exhibit on the history of campaign rhetoric was scheduled to open in the summer of 2020. We were literally on the brink of installation when the museum finally had to pull the plug. Disappointed as I was that that exhibit named Winning with Words would never see the floor, all was not lost. I was given the opportunity to take a digital pivot, partnering with Jordan Grant, who is here. I warned him I was going to say his name. We moved from an exhibit that would have been static. Once you install a museum exhibit, it doesn't change very much, to one that could unfold with the 2020 campaign in real time. Instead of the 28 objects that would have gone into that 30-foot exhibition area, I was able, with Jordan's help, to put more than 125 objects into the digital world, posting them on various platforms as the campaign progressed. So we posted convention objects in August, we posted debate objects in the fall, we went all the way through and even including the inauguration with objects in January of 2021. It was exhausting but exhilarating, at least for me. Ask Jordan later how he was feeling, from the days where there were sometimes 4 phone messages and 5 emails that flew back and forth between us. But before it ended, it was, at that time, one of the most successful digital projects the museum had undertaken, approaching 2 million impressions. I would always regret the lost physical exhibit, but I'm very proud of its unexpected digital descendant. Now, a little less fun, but no less exciting, has been the challenge of keeping American presidency fresh and relevant as elections happen and administrations take office. Again, COVID played a part. It is almost impossible to work inside an exhibit case while maintaining social distance, which makes rotations and updates very difficult. Now, the American Presidency exhibit has cases on inaugurations, presidential communication, and limits of power, which is the umbrella term that includes cases on public opinion, protest, the other branches of government, and impeachment. Now, it goes without saying that each of these topics has led to discussions about objects and labels over the past few years, some of them internal, and others percolating outside the normal venues of museum and exhibition decision-making. But fortunately, for me, public history, especially at the federal level, doesn't depend on just one person. In all of this work, I've been blessed to be part of great teams, including curators, collections managers, museum specialists, communications professionals, editors, designers, photographers, mount makers, fabricators, object processors, registrars, archivists, and the list goes on. The federal history community is large inside and outside the National Museum, and some of my terrific colleagues are active, as you know, in this society. A great team doesn't mean you don't feel the pressure, but it means you don't have to feel the pressure alone. In fact, I think some of the concerns I have felt over the past 10 years, both in collections and exhibitions, might have been alleviated somewhat had I watched those Trask lectures a little sooner. One thing they helped me understand is that even though I am not officially a historian of my agency, I do tell Smithsonian history. I often discuss the curators on whose shoulders I stand, including Herbert Collins, Keith Melder, Edie Mayo, Harry Rubenstein, and Lisa Kathleen Grady, describing how and why they collected what they did and how my work is an extension of theirs. But I think more importantly, those SHFG lectures help me see how many stresses we federal historians of, for, and in the government have in common, regardless of what agency we represent or what histories we are trying to tell. In those lectures, in addition to the metaphors, I heard repeated references to issues such as staffing issues, finances, the pressure, sometimes perceived and sometimes real, to celebrate at the risk of our own independence in research, writing, and curation. What Roger Linnaeus in his first Tracks lecture called a battle for control of the public memory. These historians, speaking on behalf of all of us, even those of us in the future, were anxious about the difficulties of recording history as it happened, the fracturing of society, and the uncertainties posed by digital history. Today, we would talk about AI. It all sounded familiar and very, very current. I mean, it was a decade ago that J. Samuel Walker warned us we were living then, quote, at a time when facts and reflection on what those facts mean do not appear to be held in the highest regard at the top levels of the government. We still live in that time. I'm sure the audience in 2020 agreed with Bill Williams' assessment that, quote, unfortunately, the federal government can sometimes be a frustrating place to work. We still agree. But in addition to naming the concerns that have and continue to weigh us down, in describing their paths to public federal history, our colleagues have also highlighted the bright spots that keep us going. They have celebrated the public's hunger and appetite for history, the expertise, careful scholarship, and thoughtful interpretation federal historians provide, and the impact federal historians can have on policymakers and the public. In 2010, Richard Baker was concerned about Senate deadlock, but he added that historians, well, we're in a position to let people know it has happened before. And we can add 16 years later that it was going to happen again. Edward Kiefer reminded us in 2022 that federal historians provide critical support for democracy. And just last year, Christian Ahlberg inspired us when she concluded that the work of federal historians, quote, can be daunting at first, but ultimately we produce something that is wonderfully textured and long-lasting. Now, I feel as though I should close this meandering stroll down my own autobiographical path with more prepositions or at least an additional basketball metaphor. I don't know, something like you miss every shot you don't take or something. But I'll try to end on a more serious note. Leslie asked me to say something encouraging for federal history and federal historians in these trying times. So what is this takeaway from hearing about my path, which is both similar to and different from your own? Well, here's one. I'm sure many of you, like me, started in the federal government as an intern or a fellow, or at least in a different branch of government than where you now serve. But I was probably a little older than most when I went looking for that kind of professional experience. So my first final thought is don't be afraid to take a chance on the older intern. It took me a little longer than many of you to find my way into the practice of federal history, but I think, or I like to think, it has been a mutually beneficial relationship. Second, I would encourage all of us not to let the difficulties and challenges of this work get us down. I started on this path with stars in my eyes, even though I had already learned multiple times that jobs don't love you back. Nonetheless, I was almost giddy that I was going to be starting something new. I was going to do the people's work. I was going to be a public servant. I know how hard it is to keep that going. I am a political historian after all, and when I tell people that, even on the Metro, they usually say something like, oh, I am so sorry, but thank you. And I'm not going to pretend that every day in the office is all fun and games. But what we do matters, even when we do it anonymously, and even if those we do it for don't always appreciate it. Because we collectively value our colleagues who came before. We know that what we do will matter to those who come after us, even if we never know who they are or how or when they will use our work. Now let me close, and really this is the last. I know I've passed up several conclusions. This is the last one. I want to tell you about a sign I saw in a metro station 2 days after I learned I would be the next Trask lecturer. I was on my way from the Smithsonian to the Library of Congress. I mean, living in Washington's amazing, right? And I was already worried about what I could possibly say to all of you, whom I respect so much. When I saw one of those giant ads that they hang over the escalator in the metro stations, and this was an ad for the Bush School of Government, and it said in large, bold letters, "Public service is a noble calling." And I thought of Roger Trask, and I thought of the Society for History and the federal government, and I thought of all of you. We work for the public and the public good. It is a noble calling. It does matter. You matter. We matter as we do our work of, for, and in the federal government. So I thank you deeply for helping me understand my own career a little better, now as it's ending, and to thank you for the honor of being with all of you today.